are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Jackson. Welcome to our webinar this morning. We are going to be discussing keys to a successful construction project. We're going to be covering some topics, hopefully, that will be helpful to you and your organization. Before we get started, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. As we start today, we will have a section about halfway through, a little more than halfway through, for some questions, and then we'll also have some question and answer time towards the end. You'll notice on your control panel, there is a question box, a place where you can actually enter your questions, and we'll try to address those. With the number of attendees, that we won't be able to use the hand-raising function today, so if you would, just enter your question in the box, and when we get to the Q&A time, we will address those. At the end of the presentation, I'll have my contact information available for you, so if you have further questions, you can address those accordingly. Also, at the end of the presentation today, we'll have a brief survey, and as part of that survey, you can request a certificate for your continuing education, those of you that are looking for that type of certification. We ask that you do fill out the survey. We do want to make our webinars informative and hopefully improve those. So we will, at this time, get started. I want to thank you for attending. As I mentioned, my name is John Jackson. Just a brief background. I've been in the construction project management consulting business, primarily as a scheduler, for over 25 years. Because of my scheduling background, I've been involved in a lot of claims, a lot of dispute resolution. I've had several schedulers on staff, had a fairly good-sized consulting practice at one point that we managed thousands of projects, actually. So I've had a lot of experience on projects that were good, a lot of experience on projects that were not so good. So because of that, I've put together this presentation on some keys to successful construction projects and just some lessons learned from my experience. I currently teach at UNLV in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I work for Encore Group. We're an Oracle partner, as well as a consulting firm with project management. So as we get started today, I want to find out a little bit about our audience. I would like to ask a couple of questions. On your control panel, or on your screen, you'll see an option to answer some questions. And so this is our get to know the audience section of our presentation. So on the screen, I'd like for you to answer the question, which category best describes your role in the construction industry, whether or not you're owner, contractor, consultant, subcontractor, and developer. We'll take just a few seconds here to give everybody a chance to vote. You'll have to be quick. As you'll see, our audience is, we got about a third of you are owners, and about a half of you are contractors and consultants, and a few developers in the screen. Here is the results of our initial poll. Let's do another one right quick, just to once again get to know a little bit more about you, about our experience in the audience. Please answer the question, how long have you been participating in the construction industry? And you can see here with our answers coming in quickly. That we have a lot of experience in our audience. Many of you have been doing this about as long as me. That's a long time. All right, let's do another one. So we're going to do three more real quick. How many webinars have you attended this year? 1 to 10, more than 10, or this is your first webinar of the year? Quite a few of you have been in a few so far. In fact, most of you have done 1 to 10. Let's do one more. Has your organization been involved in a construction delay claim in the last year? It looks like about a quarter of you have, and 3/4 of you have avoided that. Very good. All right. Well, let's get started. Let's start off talking about why good projects go bad. All too often, projects begin with high hopes for success, but end up off track and plagued with problems. When this problem, or when this happens, everyone associated with the bad project only wants to escape taking neither blame nor credit. On the other hand, everyone always gets credit or claims credit for a great project, even people who have had little to do with it. So I've never been associated with or have known of a project that began bad intentionally, but many are unfortunately doomed from the start. There are many reasons why a project may be doomed from the start or will go bad along the way. They include underfunding, right, where a budget is too tight to cover unforeseen circumstances. Maybe a consultant didn't provide an adequate enough design that can be built within the proposed budget. Or maybe a contractor bid too low and is awarded the job but then turns around and with the inability to make a profit, looks for charged extras and maybe errors and omissions to make up the difference. So so funding is an issue. Another issue is an inexperienced project team. That can also be a big issue with bad projects, whether it's owners, consultants, contractors, right? Unrealistic expectations, right, where parties expect to get something for free. Expectations should be defined early. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Architects and engineers typically hope to can provide a lot of direction to an owner to help that owner define the expectations. Constructability reviews also will help in that process. And another cause for bad projects is improper planning. It's so important to plan for the unexpected, whether it's permitting issues, site access, unforeseen conditions. All these are equally viable reasons why a project will end up in the pile of projects gone bad. But there are some basic steps that will help your projects be more successful. And we're going to look at a few of these this morning. The first step is a basic understanding of the general goals for every project stakeholder. If you look at each stakeholder on the project, you have an owner, right? The owner typically just wants a quality project delivered on time, right? They have issues that have to be addressed early on. Time may be a driving factor. Money may be the driving factor. And here's important to understand what that goal is about. If time is the driving factor on a project, if you know that that's the owner's driving factor, that might help you understand where the owner is going to go if there is a delay. For example, if it's a school project that has to open on a certain time frame, then the owner may want you to accelerate, or they're going to really be pushing for recovery schedules. Whether if budget is the driving factor and not time, then chances are the owner will not be asking for acceleration, but will allow the project to just maintain within the budget as much as possible. Another stakeholder, the architect engineer, obviously they have a goal to satisfy their client, and they have a lot of responsibility for keeping that client happy and managing all of the designs and clarifications and changes. The contractor obviously has a goal to make a profit, to complete the project on time and on budget, avoid any kind of liability with the owner and subcontractors so that at the end of the day their profit is maximized. Of course, they have a lot of issues, a lot of challenges, managing the responsibility for project completions, the budgets, delays, all of those types of issues that a contractor has to deal with. Subcontractors, obviously they want to make a profit as well, and typically subcontractors bear the brunt of lost productivity, particularly in some of your vertical construction projects where your subcontractors, your electrical and plumbing and your specialty contractors come in towards the end of a project. They typically bear the brunt of acceleration and productivity losses and even wage escalation. So understanding that about those particular project stakeholders will help you up front. Understanding the goals, look at those goals, try to manage them accordingly. Projects get into trouble when parties forget or intentionally forget the goals of other stakeholders. Just recently I was involved in a claim where an early email among owner staff clearly indicated a bad effort or a bad faith effort at the start of the project, basically ignoring a contractor's goal to make a profit. In this particular email, it was stated that one of the owner staff was very disappointed that a certain contractor had won the project, was the low bidder, and said, "I can't believe they got it. We'll have to stick it to these guys." Now, you probably know, if you're an owner, you probably know contractors in your area. In fact, you probably know good ones, and you probably know bad ones. The point is, if you don't like one of your contractors, don't document it, right? And even if you have a contractor who is a low bidder, in this particular project, the project could have been so much better if the owner would have looked at this particular situation of a low bid, and the bid probably was a little bit too low. If the owner would have looked at it and said, we want to try to help facilitate as much as we can this contractor's ability to finish this project on time and within budget. Actually, both of the stakeholders there, the contractor and the owner, would have come out a lot better, because now they're both involved in some very expensive litigation, and probably both will end up losing on the deal. We're going to cover 4 basic things in the startup. The first thing we want to look at in having a successful project is understanding just some basic construction contract issues. One of the first things we want to look at in a construction contract is remembering that a construction contract is really different from any other typical business contract. And that's because the owner, one of the parties in the contract, has the right to change the contract. The owner has the right to change the contract. They can either get a change order, right, where there's an agreement between the owner and the contractor and the architect upon a change, and it's added to the contract. An owner can issue a change directive. That's when the owner, with the architect or engineer, provides a directive for a change in the work with a proposed method for adjusting the contract. And oftentimes there's just minor changes where there is no impact to the cost or the time. But as long as the change is such that it does not exceed the original scope of the work to such a degree that it's a cardinal change and thus a breach of the contract, the owner is free to order these changes, right? So a changes clause provides that an owner, without invalidating the contract, can order extra work or make changes to the existing work by altering, adding to, or deducting from the work, with the contract sum and duration being adjusted accordingly. The difference is, and the other side of that issue is that the contractor has the right to an adjustment in the contract sum or the time. So the owner They make changes at will to the contract as long as they're willing to pay money and in time to the contractor. Now this is important. We're going to be talking about this in a little bit because sometimes a change will have a significant impact in savings to the by directing a change or using that particular clause to direct that change. Of course, today there are so many alternative delivery methods out there with the design build, so many of the projects that are being escalated and hurried to try to finish earlier or maybe to shift risk. You have the construction manager at risk type of delivery method. Innovative project delivery systems, however, can blur those traditional roles and responsibilities of parties on a construction project. And owners should understand that the use of non-traditional contract approaches creates greater risk of misunderstandings, particularly where the scope of work and compensation are changing continuously during the project. So owners should therefore understand that the contingencies involved in these non-traditional construction approaches are greater than in the traditional single prime contract approach, and you should plan accordingly on those. Okay? Here is another element of the contract that would help. These are one of the starting phases or one of the starting exercises to go through at the beginning of a job. This is a simple table that I put together a few years back, and it's just a risk allocation table. And I've used this with several project participants, early project meetings, just to help the different parties, the different stakeholders, understand where their risks are. At least maybe it's just a matter of understanding where you disagree about the risk, but identifying those potential contracts early. This table has the different types of risk. There's outside influences that can impact a project, whether it's weather, acts of God. There's resource and prerequisites to project, whether it's funding, site access, permits, those types of elements that can provide or that supply risk to a project. And then there's performance-related elements. And there's a long list of those that I've listed. There everything from providing the manpower, owner-furnished material, submittal reviews, plans, designs, use of float, failure to coordinate work, all those types of things. Knowing the areas where conflicts are likely to arise and carefully planning to address them can reduce the risk of conflict. And so this table right here is very helpful in starting a project, helping the parties identify where the risk and where potential conflicts on the risk may occur. And therefore, this will increase the chance of a successful project for all those concerned if you identify these issues early on. Of course, there's always the opportunity that different project stakeholders try to capitalize on by shifting that risk. Factors that can try to shift risk are often included in a construction contract. There's exculpatory language in a contract where one party may try to shift the risk to another party. For example, denying adequacy of design. In other words, I'm saying that if the design is not right, it's not my problem. I've seen clauses where there is denial of adequacy of subsurface conditions. In other words, if you've run into subsurface conditions, that's your responsibility. And there's another very common exculpatory clause is no damage for delay clause. This is called exculpatory language. It's language that tries to shift risk from one party to the other. And a lot of these will not hold up. No damage for delay clause may not be enforced in some of the following situations. For example, if delays could not be anticipated at the beginning by a contractor, or maybe delays are caused by fraud or bad faith by one party or the other. Maybe delays are caused by active interference. Maybe issuance of notice to proceed was delayed, despite knowledge that, the notice to proceed was issued despite knowledge that work couldn't begin. These are called, sometimes when there's a lot of exculpatory language in a contract, these are called one-sided contracts. And they will typically generate as many claims as they prevent. Construction claims principally are caused by unforeseen change conditions, changes in the work, late drawings and design, permits, equipment, materials. Another cause is inadequate drawings or specifications, interference in the work. When commencing construction, contractors justifiably expect that all necessary permits are going to be in place, that they'll have access to the work, that they'll receive timely engineering and owner-supplied information. Shop drawings will be reviewed promptly. Unexpected conditions or changes will be fairly compensated. Where these expectations are not met, contractors will often lose money on a project, and it will prompt claims no matter what the contract provides. In a worst-case scenario, severe losses may force a contractor out of business. I've seen a lot of that recently. It results in a failure to complete the work with delays, disruptions, and ultimately inevitable cost to the project. So construction disputes are more likely to be avoided through a fair allocation of project risk. In other words, taking the risk involved. You can use that list that was on the previous slide and provide a fair allocation of project risk. The guiding principles are that risk should be allocated as follows. First, your risk should be allocated to the party who has direct control over that portion of the process that creates the risk. Whoever has control in that area, that's they should have the associated risk. Second, if no party has direct control, risk should be allocated to the party who is best able to protect against or to avoid an unexpected loss or casualty. Finally, the last one, where no party has control, as in unforeseen site conditions, usually the risk becomes the responsibility of the owner. No matter what your exculpatory clause may say, risk becomes the responsibility of the owner because the owner is the party that initiated the construction project and presumably is the ultimate beneficiary in the results of the contract. So exculpatory language trying to shift risk, avoiding that fair allocation of risk, will often result in an owner paying twice. Usually a contractor will put contingency in their bid to cover for that risk, and if issues do surface, usually the contractor can recover claims despite that exculpatory language. The key is, understanding the contract and a fair allocation of risk. Let's talk about another contractual issue that I come across quite a bit, and it is understanding obligations in the construction contract. There's basically two types of obligations, or two categories of obligations in a construction contract. There's one that's called express obligations, and a second one is implied obligations. Express obligations are those obligations specifically spelled out in a contract. Submittals have to be approved. Certain forms and procedures have to be used. They're spelled out in the contract. Those are called expressed. They're specifically expressed in the contract. But there's a whole other set of obligations that go in the construction contract that a lot of project personnel miss, and it ends up hurting the project and ultimately hurting the stakeholders, all of the stakeholders in the project. And these are the implied obligations. This is what I want to cover for just a few minutes, talking about implied obligations. These are the obligations that are not specifically spelled out in the contract, and I've listed three of them here. There's the implied obligation to inform, right? In other words, for example, the issuance of a notice to proceed despite the known presence of delays. If you know there is delay going on and you go ahead and issue notice to proceed and you do not inform the delay or the contractor of the delay, you failed on your implied obligation to inform. It's a failure to disclose superior knowledge, right, or information that's not readily available to the contract, and it's crucial to performance. So same thing with contractors and subcontractors. If you know of issues that could impact one of the other project stakeholders, you have an implied obligation to inform in those situations. The second one is an implied obligation to cooperate. Now, this is one that is very important, and it becomes involved in a lot of disputes. The perfect example is expediting the flow of information on a project. I'm involved in a delay dispute where an owner's consultant, right, took the expressed obligation. The contract said you had 21 days to review a submittal, right? So the owner's consultant took that express obligation of 21 days to review a critical submittal. This occurred on the initial submittal as well as 2 resubmittals. So basically 63 days of review for a submittal. The 2 resubmittals required minor changes. Now, I don't know how an arbitrator will decide on the issue, but the consultant certainly put the owner at risk by not promptly returning the submittal reviews. In fact, it's very suspicious that each submittal review took exactly 21 days, right? This type of delay is frequent with RFI turnarounds as well. Just because your RFI says, or your expressed obligation says you have 14 days to return an RFI, you have an obligation to cooperate. If you know that submittal or that RFI is critical, your implied obligation to cooperate means turn that around as quickly as possible and don't hold it on your desk. I've known situations, I've seen several situations where an owner or a consultant, just in an effort to prove a point or because the contract, the relationship in the contract had gone south, they would sit on a submittal until the very last day just to impact a contractor, or sit on an RFI to the very last day just to hold that contractor up and affect their work. The implied duty to cooperate includes can be very substantial in recovering damages to a contractor if a contractor can demonstrate that the other party did not cooperate. Of course, the contractor also has an implied duty to cooperate. Contractor, part of that implied duty to cooperate includes notifying the owner of delays and impacts. If you know of a delay or an impact that's come up and you have the opportunity to recover from that, you have the implied obligation to cooperate, which kind of overlaps with what they call the implied obligation to mitigate. You have an opportunity, if a contractor can resequence the work without cost impact or whatever, there is an implied obligation to mitigate damages no matter who caused the delay. And that's very important when you're addressing particularly time extension requests, those kind of things. That implied obligation to mitigate can be very part of a good resolution strategy. There's a few other implied obligations. The contractor has a duty to schedule and coordinate the work. An owner has a duty not to delay, hinder, or interfere with the work. That could include both action, interference, active interference, or just inaction can constitute interference. Another implied obligation is the duty to grant reasonable time extensions, right? So that a contractor, if they're delayed, can get at least review of a time extension, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But if you don't grant that reasonable time extension, a lot of time a contractor can accelerate the work and get recovery for that type of work, particularly if liquidated damages or the threat of liquidated damages is part of the dialogue in dealing with that. The bottom line goes back to teamwork on these implied obligations, informing, cooperating, mitigating. Whatever is best for the project will win the day. So if you're in a situation where you've got submittals coming in, you've got a contractor that's complaining about delays, if you are concerned about a contractor that's delaying, if you're a contractor and you're concerned about a sub and managing that sub and how these things are going to work out, even if relationships are on the downhill path, it's important to look at what is best for the contract. If I've got a submittal that can be returned quickly, I should do it. If I've got an ability to mitigate some damages, I should do it. And ultimately, that will be a big deciding factor in whether or not a project is good or bad. Let's talk about another issue, the scheduling. The schedule is one tool that includes every project stakeholder's work, right? And usually there's only one project stakeholder that participates in that process. In so many construction projects that I'm involved in, the contractor prepares the schedule, and sometimes they don't even communicate it to a sub. A lot of times the owner has no involvement in preparing that schedule, but in reality, the sub should have involvement because a lot of that work includes their to-do list items. The owner should be involved in the process because a lot of the items in a schedule is going to be under the responsibility of the owner. So while the contractor does have responsibility, like preparing the baseline schedule, doing the updates, coordinating subcontractors, right? All of those are the contractor's responsibilities. But a subcontractor also has, some responsibilities there. They should request involvement in the scheduling process. They should make sure the schedule has normal and reasonable durations, that they can perform according to the schedule, right? So even though a prime contractor doesn't guarantee that everything's going to go exactly as planned, they should be able to support the fact that the schedule will be followed within reasonable bounds. But the owner has a significant stake in that project schedule, and very important. The owner has issues with site access. There's milestones that are important, maybe follow-on contractors that have to be coordinated. There's owner-furnished materials. There's approval of shop drawings and samples. There's occupancy issues, commissioning type of issues. All of these issues that an owner is involved, it's so important for an owner to be involved in that planning process. The key is in determining how you can get that and how you can get the involvement and substantiate the involvement in the contract so that you make sure it happens, right? The ideal scenario is to have joint meetings where the subcontractor and an owner can even participate in the planning process. So the scheduling is a very important part. In fact, the scheduling requirements in contracts have increased over the years. Probably for the last 25 years, I've seen the legal application. There's been economic issues, technology, scheduling efficiency. All of these issues have played a part in scheduling requirements and the contract requirements. One of the biggest issues that I've seen recently is the financial application associated with the scheduling. For years, it was the legal application. Most of your specifications were dealing with, how to avoid claims, how to resolve delays. But now you have, in today's economy and with today's technology, the financial application for scheduling has influenced a lot of these specifications because your schedule actually is your ability to look into the future, right? If a good schedule is put together with all of your tasks and logic and the plan is in place, as an organization you can look into the future. Well, now with your enterprise databases, you have the ability to project into the future, whether it's cash flow, resource management. So getting all of that information into a contract so that you can make sure that a contractor is providing the information you need, or same thing if you're a contractor and you're wanting the information from subs. Getting that information can be very important. I've got a list of questions that I always go through with an owner during specification development, making sure you have milestones and time frames in there. What about updates? Are they required? Is approval required? What are the owner's to-do list that should be incorporated in the contractor schedule? What do you do with an early completion? Is it acceptable? Should resource loading be required? Cost loading? If your organization is using your scheduling tool to see into the future, then you probably should require cost loading. I've got a checklist for good specifications that should be coordinated. If you'd like that checklist, let me know. I'll send it to you. But it includes coordination of multi-contract issues, the level of detail that you want, limits on durations and so forth. Are you going to have the milestones in there? Identifying remedies for non-compliance of schedule submittals. How a schedule is going to be updated? What reports are going to be required? Are you going to be using pay applications? so forth. All of these types of issues, I've got a long checklist of things that are important to have in a good scheduling specification, and depending on what your organization needs and what your ultimate goals are, will help you determine what a good scheduling specification. But identifying these issues early is one of the key elements. The scheduling specification is one of the most effective, particularly on your administrative specifications, for helping ensure that a project is successful. Of course, we know that you have the hot topic lately is on early completion schedules. What do I do with an early completion schedule? Should I issue a change order reducing the contract days? Should I reject the schedule? What about schedule management? The key is to remember on early completion schedules, the contractor has a right to finish early, right? That is, they have a right to minimize their costs. They have a right to get off of this job and go to work on another one. They have a right to schedule their work. So how you manage that is going to be very, very important. Probably the best scenario is managing that schedule. If you take the time to really help that contractor and you manage as an owner, manage that schedule, you'll find it more effective in making sure that whether it's early completion or not, you can help make sure that project goes well. Since you can't specify quality, no matter how good your specifications, no matter how long they are, you can write a book on it. But good monitoring procedures are the best way to make sure you get quality in a schedule. Good monitoring procedures will incorporate accountability. For example, if you're monitoring on a weekly basis, if you put in your specs that the contractor has to prepare their look-aheads from their contract schedule, and you monitor those on a weekly basis and hold that contractor accountable, you'll find that accountability not only will help you monitor the project and identify issues, but you'll ultimately see the contractor schedule improve just because of that accountability. Here's two simple additions to specifications for getting a project off on the right foot. Number one, have schedule meetings during the baseline preparation. Just put it right in your specs. During your baseline preparation for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the project, we're going to be meeting, once a week to review your schedule. Put it up on a screen with a projector or TV, whatever, and go through the schedule. That gives you the opportunity to provide your input, to make sure your to-do list items, if you're an owner, is included in the schedule. It gives you the opportunity to review the schedule prior to submittal so that when it does come in, you've already had a chance to look at it. You've already identified any scheduling issues that happen that may be foreseeable. And ultimately, since the schedule really is a to-do list, it gives you an ability to actually discuss items that are projected in the future and identify issues before they ever before they surface. And doing the same thing monthly for a schedule review meeting, allowing yourself time to look at the critical path, making sure all the parties discuss what's critical, the upcoming work, any issues that are coming up. Once again, that schedule will really help provide a good meeting agenda to help you cover the issues that could impact the project and make it go south. Another issue is once you get a project going, make sure you have good documentation. I just in the last few months, I had a big claim. It's actually several claims from one client that came in and just boxes and boxes and boxes of documents. And one of the first things that we had to do was try to organize them. And even after the fact, good organization will help you manage through a project quickly. Contract documents, those are your general conditions, technical specs, your drawings, all your actual agreement, right? Those are important. You organize them by project documents. Those are the documents or anything that's officially transmitted, right? We call those the project documents, submittals, RFIs, requests for information, letters, meeting minutes, all of those type of things. And then there's the proprietary documents, which are the daily reports, timesheets that are each individual organization keeps track of in-house. Now, the importance of these particularly when it comes to resolving issues, is that most of your documentation occurs at the proprietary document level, your daily reports. I just been building as-built schedules or actually going back and trying to identify costs for changes. Most of that information comes out of the proprietary, those daily reports, timesheets, and journals, so forth. The other big factor is that your contract documents are where most anything is going to get resolved. That's where the check gets written, right? It has to be officially documented in a contract change. So the key is to have good processes and good procedures to make sure that as you are documenting your project, that you have good procedures in place to make sure that a workflow can help you resolve these issues early on. So good documentation is another very important tip for having a successful project. And there are a lot of good tools out there. Obviously, with the technology, there's some great tools out there to help you document your jobs better. There's free tools. There's for simple solutions. There's some very expensive tools for a lot more complicated solutions. But the key is to have some kind of solution to make sure that your projects are being documented. I've got an example of a daily report here. This is an example of a daily report that brings no value to anyone on the project, right? Just a note for a weekly meeting, check progress of footing certs. That's not a very good daily report. A good daily report should be on a good form to make sure that your field organization or your field staff are documenting exactly what needs to be documented. Obviously, in this technology, you can do a lot of this electronically now. But the key is good documentation starts with good documentation, having good reports, forms, and procedures to make sure you have some good processes in place. We're going to go on. If you have questions, make sure you're asking those questions. We're going to keep moving, and we're running a little tight here. I want to talk about some warning signs that indicate a project is going bad, right? And if you have to be very alert. Sometimes we get so tied up into the day-to-day issues on a job that we don't step back and just really take a good 10,000-foot view of what's going on in the project and identify warning signs. From an owner's perspective, warning signs that a contractor is experiencing difficulties. You want to look for personnel changes, right? If personnel changes can oftentimes show that a contractor may be having some difficulty. Maybe a significant slowdown in the progress of work, a reduction in manpower kind of slowdown. Materials not being delivered on time. Maybe someone's not getting paid, right? Subcontractors are complaining about not being paid. Or subcontractor and material supplier liens. If you've got a subcontractor that's having difficulty performing, it's important to recognize that, step back, evaluate it, and look for a potential solution. A contractor, there's always warning signs that an owner may be having difficulty in meeting its financial commitments. Sometimes those are less obvious, but the following indications of financial difficulty should be watched very carefully. Maybe your progress payments are not getting paid timely, right? That happens. I've seen contractors go out of business just because one project, they had an owner on one project that was not paying substantial payments, and it affected all of that contractor's project. So when you see progress payments not being made, that's a good sign to make some contingency plans. Sometimes you'll see an owner that's that's becoming less cooperative in paying for extra work. Request maybe to scale back on the scope of the project, right? Or maybe you hear other contractors that are having a hard time. The key is to always keep a good 10,000-foot view. Step back every once in a while. Take a look at what's going on and identify those things that may be occurring that could be a signal that things are not going as they should. Maybe it's a good warning sign. Here's a good one. I bring this up in nearly every session that I teach because I've seen this as a warning sign that gets missed so often. And I ask this question: what does on schedule really mean? If you're looking at a contractor schedule and a contractor month after month, they're submitting their updates and they show their finish date is still within the contract allotted time, the question is, are they really on schedule? The truth is, a lot of times contractors are not on schedule. The way I measure whether or not a contractor is on schedule is I look at what they told me they were going to do last month, and then I compare it with what they actually did last month. That's how I determine if a contractor is on schedule or not. Because a lot of times the project is slipping, the contractor's not meeting his dates for whatever reason, and they're adjusting, pulling time out of the end, they're borrowing time from the end of the project to still show that the schedule is, or that the project is going to complete on time. In my opinion, that is not on schedule. You're borrowing time from the end, covering for the time that you're not making currently on your schedule. That's a potential problem that gets missed on so many projects. Asking the right question is very important. What is the contractor really on schedule? Another key area, if you define that, is identifying these issues early. If you see an issue that's occurring on a project, whether it's a delay, whether it is a slowdown in performance, whether it's a failure to complete work on time, whatever, the key is to identify it as early as possible, because early resolution plus minimizing the risk of those issues is the best way to approach it. That's your best practice. I mean, there's not enough time to discuss every type of problem or situation that can arise on a project, but I can say that in every situation I know of, the earlier you resolve it, the better. If the longer those issues are held out there, the more expensive and the more litigious, right, or the more contentious they're going to be in the resolution process. When it comes time to resolving issues, there's two elements in the claims presentation. First, you have to determine the entitlement. Are there any merits? Is there really an issue here that, or who is responsible for it? And then once you determine who's responsible, then the second element in resolving issues is determining how much. What is the quantum? What's the dollar amount of the claim? And there's different ways of analyzing the quantum. If it's a delay damage, for example, there's 4 basic types of analysis that you can use to analyze those delays once entitlement has been established. But if there's no entitlement, there's no sense in wasting the time on analyzing the delay. So the key is in getting the entitlement established and then using a good analysis method to determine the quantum. Another type of damage is loss of productivity. You know, how you're going to define that, there's different ways to measure lost productivity. You know, probably one of the best ones, if you've ever used it before, is the measured model approach. That's a very good way of measuring that. Another type of analysis or another type of damage that I've just recently was involved in is a loss of opportunity claim. You know, that's where a contractor makes 2 assumptions. The assumption is I would have had another project, I would have made profit on that other project, or I would have made profit on that work, right? Of course, there's always 2 counterclaims. I'll assume that you, Mr. Contractor, would have had that other work, but based on how you did this work, you probably would have lost money on that one as well, right? So this delay or this change actually saved you money. You know, some damages obviously have more validity than others, but the key is understanding the 2 steps that you have to go through to resolving issues. First, get the entitlement. You know, is there really any entitlement to damages? And then you go about quantifying those damages. There's two types of delays, and this is very important to understand. There's the pure delay, and then there's a disruption delay. These are just basic categories, right? Most specifications address the method for analyzing delays only on pure delays. They'll say you have to use a certain schedule. You have to use the schedule that was current at the time of the delay and insert the delay in that schedule, right? Well, that only works for a pure delay. The disruption may require a different analysis method. So once again, if you want to get issues resolved early, understanding these two different types of analysis is important, and don't limit yourself in your contract to just one analysis method. Obviously, your contemporaneous time frame, that's what we just mentioned, that's what most of your current contracts issue. That's for a pure delay. That's where you insert a delay in the schedule and it shows the impact. That's the ideal scenario. That is a pure delay where you can impact a delay in a schedule. But there's also that disruption where the most common way of, or one of the only ways that you can analyze it, is looking at a total time or a total cost approach. And so you end up with 4 challenges on a total time approach, because you have to be able to show on a total time that number one, there was no other way to quantify it. In other words, there wasn't a simple little activity I could just plug into the schedule and push it. Maybe it was where there were so many changes going on that there was no way to identify a particular issue and say it cost you this much. We did so much extra work, it was so disrupted, our productivity was gone, our ability to perform it timely and in a cost-effective way was impacted. So there's no other way we could quantify it. You have to be able to justify that as a contractor, to say why you're using this total time or total cost approach. The original duration, you have to be able to show that the original duration or the original cost was reasonable. You have to be able to substantiate that what you're using as a budget number, or what the work should have cost, or how long it should have taken. You have to be able to substantiate that. That's where a good measured mile is a good way to look at that if you're trying to get it resolved. You also have to be able to show that this actual duration or your actual cost is substantiated. You're not pulling cost or playing around with numbers or dates. You have to be able to show your actual information is correct. And then ultimately you have to show that the difference in the two is not your fault. If you're an owner and you're reviewing this type of claim, these are the things that you have to do. A lot of times the total cost in a claim, you may have a total cost for just a portion of the work. If you're a contractor and you're having to deal with one of these scenarios, what you want to do is try to break out as many of the things that you can identify, as many of the delays that you can do a pure delay analysis or some kind of contemporaneous analysis. Break all of that out. Avoid putting it all in one big package, a total cost for the whole project or a total delay. Sometimes that's the only option, but if you can break it out, you're going to be much more successful. But these are the 4 things that you're going to need to address. So whether you're preparing one of these or whether you're defending against one of these, this is one of the best ways to identify that. Okay? Here is the key to the bottom line to identifying delays early or identifying issues early. If I've mentioned a delay occurs sometimes when a contractor is delayed, right? And a lot of times an owner will not address that delay, hoping that the contractor is going to still finish on time. Maybe they don't want to give a time extension because they think, well, maybe if we just keep quiet, the contractor will finish on time. Or if we threaten them with liquidated damages, they'll finish on time. Here's the problem with that. A lot of times you get to the project, to the end, and the contractor doesn't finish on time. So not only do you end up having to pay for the damages associated with the delay, you may have to pay for damages associated with acceleration or recovery. Here's the key. If you identify issues early, and it's the same with a contractor, if you identify these early, submit your time extension request early, you have a lot more options for resolving it. Sometimes as an owner, when I'm working with some of my clients as owners, if we identify the delays early, I will give them, I will say, yes, that was a 10-day delay. We acknowledge it was a 10-day delay, but instead of giving you a 10-day time extension, we would like for you to accelerate these two activities down here and recover these 10 days and just tell us how much it'll cost. And in most cases, you can find much more cost-effective, a lot lower risk schedules to accelerate and maybe even pay a little extra money instead of paying for extended overhead and other costs associated with that delay. So once again, that's the key to identifying it early, inserting the delays in the schedule, and resolving that issue early. And then lastly, I want to cover one more thing, and then we'll be done. I'll answer a couple questions. This is one of the most important things that an owner and a contractor can do once an issue surfaces. Analyze the risk of the dispute or of the claim. Just recently, I had a client involved in a delay claim. The contractor was asking for a certain amount of money. My client probably was right, had a 50-50 chance of being right. They did have, it wasn't really clean. And, I encouraged him, hey, you know what, just resolve it. It's going to cost you a lot more to try to fight it with the potential of losing it than it would be just to pay it. And so that's what you call, that's a very simple example of analyzing the risk. So one of the first things that you want to do, if you're in a dispute, or if there's potential for a dispute coming up, maybe a contractor submitted or a subcontractor submitted a claim, you want to analyze the risk. And here's how you do it. First, you want to break out the cost and the time associated with it. In other words, how much is it worth, right? You look at, extra work, right? Is it work that was clearly identified, that's been documented? Maybe you disagree with a little bit of it here and there. You can assign, out of this, $50,000 in extra work, really it's probably only worth $30,000. Take that money, define it, break it out. Then take the lost productivity. I mentioned before, with certain measuring tools or different ways you can analyze loss of productivity claims, you can identify and say, hey, you know what, out of all this claim, we may be liable for 50% of it, or we may end up having to pay 25% of it. Whatever you think that is, having a fair and personally honest, being honest with yourself or with your organization to say, hey, this is how much our risk is on this particular part of the claim. Then you look at any types of delay issues. This is important, to take this cost of the claim and say, okay, we've assigned a value to extra work. We think this extra work is probably 80%. Loss of productivity, probably only 25%. The delay, probably 70%. You can assign numbers to this just based on a simple evaluation and say this is really what that claim is worth. But now let's look at some of those costs and break them down. For example, if part of that claim is an early completion claim, you can look at it and say, well, here's our contract date, right? This period of early completion before the contract is going to have a much lower rate of recovery. If you're a contractor asking for early completion, those dates that you're asking for early completion are less likely to be recovered. You're less likely to get an arbitrator to side with you. Yeah, you might get it, but you may not. It's less likely. The period that comes after the contract is going to be much more consistent in its recovery if you have a good substantiated delay and a good measurement of the delay. So breaking these types of delay analysis, these different things down to come up with a fair evaluation, what you think your risk is associated with that claim, is going to be important. But if it is an early completion, by the way, Mr. Contractor, you have to be able to show that you intended to complete the project early, right? Maybe you have to show that your schedules were showing an early completion. You have to be able to show that you had the capability. In other words, you were meeting that early completion schedule. Or even if it wasn't an early completion schedule initially, maybe you were way ahead of the schedule. You have to demonstrate that you were capable of finishing early and that you would have completed early but for the delays, right? So that's an early completion game. So take those costs and say this is what the claim is really worth. Then the second part of your risk analysis is looking at all of your costs to defend or prepare for this claim. You've got legal fees, consulting fees, all your staff, that's going to be associated with putting the preparation together for defending the claim. These are the types of things that a lot of organizations, they forget to deal with. They may have a $100,000 claim or $60,000 claim, and they spend $30,000 to $40,000 trying to defend it. That was the scenario I mentioned previously, where an owner, that by the time they looked at what it was going to cost to try to defend it, it's more, to put the issue behind you and resolve it, move on. Let's just keep the project moving and put the past behind you, and because no one really is going to win if your preparation cost is not in line with your percentage of success. So, but it's important to look at, and then actually once you do that, you look at also your managerial factors, your loss of focus on a project, the client goodwill, maybe the relationship you have, whether it's a good contractor that you enjoy working with, or an owner that you enjoy working with. A lot of times if you have a consistency for having a lot of claims on your jobs, the cost of doing work for you is going to go up. So understanding those things are very important, and then you can determine whether or not you're going to pursue a claim or you're going to defend against a claim, or how you can really strategize to resolve that issue early. I want to just cover quick questions. I know we're out of time. I had a question on project management software packages. I will certainly be happy to discuss those. We'll do that offline. I'll contact you on that. I did have a question on what is the measured mile. Let me explain that here in the next minute. A measured mile is the ability to have a project that had some portion of the project. The term comes from a project that had a particular section, maybe, that you were able to perform, and you were able to move dirt, let's say, or you were able to process material at $5 a yard, right? It's on the same project, same superintendent, same management, same equipment, same crews. You were able to do it in one portion of the project. You were able to do it for $5 a yard, let's say down in this section of a roadway, right? But then you get down into this section of the roadway, and because of, let's say you had some soft spots here, you had some design issues here, another design issue over here, more soft spot issues over in here, so where the work became broken up and your crews kept having to move back and forth. You have a measured mile on this portion of the project where you can demonstrate you could have done it for $4 a yard, but down here you show that it took you, down here it was $4 a yard. In this section of the project, it cost you $8 a yard. So you were able to demonstrate that you could have done it for $4. So down here you would request that the additional $4 that it cost you, you get recovered per yard or per unit of material. That's a simple explanation of a measured mile. We will have, if you would like a handout of the presentation, feel free to fill out the survey, and I think there's a question on there if you'd like the handout, and we will make sure we send it to you. And obviously I have a lot of notes to support this, so any of the questions that you had that came up or anything that you need, the particular issues that you would like some of my notes, feel free to contact me. Here is my contact information, and with that I will end the session. I want to thank you so much for attending today, and I appreciate my silo for supporting and sponsoring this event. Thank you.